For decades, we've seen challengers to the US dollar rise and then fall yet again. Time after time, we've seen news and rumors and ideas of new currencies that would challenge the hegemony of the US dollar around the world. And the latest news coming out about a new gold-backed BRICS currency is no different, with leaks circulating the internet about these BRICS nations planning a new currency that will be backed by gold. So will this finally be a challenger to the US dollar that can take hold, that can last, and can overcome some of those network effects and the deep entrenchment of the dollar around the world? Or is this just yet another currency that is doomed to fail? First, let's take a look at exactly what BRICS is. BRICS is an acronym that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Although other nations such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Iran, Argentina, and Kazakhstan have also considered joining as well. Now, this term has become so common that many people assume that BRICS is something similar to like the UN, an official coalition of these nations, an alliance, all banding together for a common goal. But the word BRICS was coined in 2001 by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill. And so no, it is not an official organization or alliance or anything of the sort. And in fact, as we'll see later, there may actually be more problems brewing underneath the surface of this BRICS bloc than most people would imagine, which makes sense considering that these BRICS countries represent about 40% of the world's population with 3.2 billion people. However, they do all share a common goal of wanting to reduce their economic and their political dependence on the US dollar. Now, news and rumors of BRICS trying to start their own currency, whether it is pure fiat backed by a basket of commodities or even backed purely by gold, are nothing new, but they have accelerated ever since the US put sanctions on Russia in response to the invasion of Ukraine. And the latest of these is that BRICS is planning a new currency backed solely by gold, a new Eastern version of the old Bretton Woods Agreement. Now, between these nations, Russia and China right now hold the vast majority of the gold. But the logistics of how to put together this gold-backed currency, where the gold would come from, how much each nation would contribute, is actually the least of the worries here. In order to understand why, we have to kind of take a trip back in time to understand why humanity moved from gold as money to gold-backed money in the first place. Gold coins used to circulate as money. So if you were to go to the grocery store, the market, buy a horse, buy a cabin, you'd plop down some gold coins on the counter and you'd receive your goods for that transaction. You'd carry around your coins with you. You'd keep your coins secure and safe at home. The commodity itself was the money. Because of gold's limited supply and the fact that as humanity progresses forward, we get more wealth, that means you eventually need less money to afford the same amount of wealth or the same amount of money to afford more wealth. Essentially, wealth gets cheaper over time, or in other words, you have natural deflation with a limited money supply. This is fantastic for savers. It disincentivizes borrowing, incentivizes production, and facilitates the fastest progress of the growth of wealth and technology. There are, however, two major problems with a commodity monetary system. Number one is the divisibility of that commodity. Over time, that commodity becomes so valuable that you can't use it for everyday transactions anymore. Even today, 1 ounce of gold is worth around $2,000. You're likely not going to take that to your local corner grocery store to buy your weekly groceries. And over time, on a sound money system, as stuff gets cheaper and cheaper, you need to divide the unit of that commodity to a smaller and smaller unit to still make it usable for those smaller transactions. Eventually, though, you get to a point where you cannot divide it anymore, and it becomes unable to be used for those small transactions, and then it becomes purely a vehicle for savings rather than transactions. The second problem with a commodity monetary system is the lack of ability for transactions across large spaces. If I want to buy something from China, I have to send my actual gold coin to China. That's expensive. It can get lost. I have to pay for somebody to take it there. I have to pay for security. And so commodity monetary systems where a commodity has to trade places as well as the good or the service that's exchanging hands, severely limits global or cross-border transactions that can take place. This limits the growth of wealth that can take place then as well. Because of these two major disadvantages, humanity moved to a gold-backed system where people started trusting a third party to store all of the gold for them. And then when a transaction happened, you were simply transferring the ownership of that gold and the gold never moved. At least for the last 1,000 years, this is how gold was used as money in a gold-backed system where vaults or churches or governments held all of the actual gold, and then the ownership of that gold traded hands through the use of paper notes. This made it far cheaper and more efficient to transact across large spaces, and it also meant you could trade ownership of any denomination of that gold that you wanted without actually having to cut that gold coin in half or dilute it. By the way, guys, I'm going to be speaking at the Stock Pulse Silver Symposium about the history and future of sound money. It's in Las Vegas from September 29th through October 1st. There's going to be a ton of other great speakers there. There are going to be plenty of opportunities for us to do meet and greet, hang out, get some drinks together. I would love to meet you there. And everybody who shows up is going to get 1 ounce of silver as well, a 1 ounce silver coin. So I'd love to see you there. There's a discount link, 10% off in the description below. So sign up there, get that discount, and tickets are running out, so sign up soon. But obviously there's problems with every monetary system, and this one obviously had some big problems as well, and that was that the third parties who were being trusted to hold the gold sometimes wouldn't actually hold all the gold. They said they did. They would issue more paper that could be redeemed for gold than they actually had gold in the vault. This would lead to inflation and then ultimately a run on the bank, massive boom bust cycles, and ultimately it was theft and fraud. And in a purely free market, only the most trustworthy third party holders of that gold would have survived, and all the ones would have gone out of business who decided not to be trustworthy. But governments didn't allow this to happen. They nationalized the practice of fraud and they called it fractional reserve banking. And they said all banks can do this as long as you're a part of our government banking system. And governments started central banks to make that practice widespread and to be able to take advantage of it themselves, backing it up with their monopoly on violence. Now we know how that story ended too, with multiple episodes of hyperinflation around the world, gold devaluations, and ultimately leaving the gold standard for good. But the problem with a gold-backed monetary system still exists. It's inherent with the system. You have to be able to trust that that third party has your gold and you can redeem your ownership of that gold at any time. Similar to today, how in the last couple of months we've seen bank runs take place. Those bank runs only take place once the people think that that money is not actually there or that all their money's not there. Once they no longer have trust in the institution, they go to get their money out. But another institution may be far worse off. I've done a video on Bank of America that they're in a very terrible situation right now with their unrealized losses. But due to those recent bailouts mainly, and the fact that Bank of America is considered a systemically important bank, people trust that if the bank doesn't have the money to give them, then the government will back it up. Therefore, they know they could get their money, so they're not going to try and get their money. It's the same thing with a gold-backed currency. You need that third party who's holding on to all that gold to have an extremely high level of trust by all users, that at any time they can redeem their claim for gold and that they will actually get physical delivery. And as long as that trust is there, then you'll likely never actually have to do that physical delivery. By the way, this is why I teach in my membership program about having a portion of your assets in gold. I typically like around 20% of my money in gold because it operates as savings throughout time. You preserve your purchasing power, but I don't like it all physically at home. Some people live in apartments, some people travel a lot. Many people don't have the ability to even have any at home at all. I think that's ideal if you can, but I also like having some in storage in other countries, preferably countries that have a high degree of economic freedom like Switzerland and Singapore. And I also teach about the alternatives like ETFs, that some people have all their wealth in like their 401k, don't have the ability to take it out of there to buy physical gold. So they need options inside of their 401k to be able to buy gold. So in my membership program, one of the things that I do is I go through all of the options that are available to everybody, from the ideal absolute best all the way down to just acceptable ways to have some exposure to gold. And ultimately it all comes down to what we're talking about here, which is trust. You have to know with a high highest degree of certainty that's possible that your gold is actually there. And trust is the main issue with BRICS right now. Recently, news broke that Putin is planning on traveling to South Africa. In response, South Africa is saying that if Putin does show up, they will have to arrest him. In response, Russia said that arresting its sitting president would be a declaration of war. As Brent Johnson pointed out recently on Twitter, you would expect that the R and the S in BRICS, Russia and South Africa, that are allegedly going to be creating a currency that will topple the US dollar, would be able to work out a visit between the two without risking a declaration of war. It seems like that's not all the problems going on between members of BRICS right now, as Russia is saying it has billions of rupees from India that it can't use. Remember, India is the I in BRICS. Russia has now suspended negotiations to settle trade in rupees, saying that having so many rupees is not desirable and they're not comfortable with holding all of that Indian currency. Here's the bottom line. It is possible, and in my opinion, even likely, that at some point in the future, we do have a monetary system, at least somewhere in the world, that has some backing to something hard like gold. But this requires trust above all. And when that trust is not there, it doesn't work, which means it'll probably be more likely that something like this starts small with one nation locally and grows due to popularity from there. And it's probably less likely that we see something start from the top down between an unofficial coalition of nations that cannot even come to an agreement on whether or not there will be war between them just from a visit of a president. But crazier things have happened, so we'll see. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.